I don't have a PowerPoint, so I think I'll just sit here and share our observations and changes that we're seeing on St. Lawrence Island. As I mentioned, we have 2 formerly used defense sites. We've identified PCBs, pesticides, heavy metals, solvents, massive fuel spills. But we're also some of the most highly contaminated population on the planet because of our reliance on subsistence foods. And I mentioned this morning the marine mammals that we sampled. We collected over 300 samples. In the beginning of our St. Lawrence Island project, our people wanted to get our blood tested first. So we tested 3 groups: Gamble residents, Savoonga residents, and Savoonga residents closely associated with Northeast Cape, one of the 2 formerly used defense sites. And we have 6 to 9 times higher PCB levels in the blood of our people than the average American in the lower 48. We attribute this, the Northeast Cape families have 10 times more PCB levels. Savoonga about 7 times, and Gamble residents about 6 times more than the average American. And at the request of our leadership, they wanted us to look at our traditional foods. And we collected over 300 samples of everything that we eat. We tested 1 batch for PCBs, pesticides, and another for heavy metals. And it was quite alarming that we found the high levels of PCBs in the marine mammals, blubber, and rendered oils, which are important foods for our people. So the other current grant that we got from NIHS, we looked at flame retardants, PBDEs, but we also looked at perfluorinated compounds. This is a grant that just ended. As you heard Pam mention this morning, our homes are closed in more during the winter. We stay in longer because of our long winters, and they're more insulated. So we collected household dust. We selected homes with at least 1 child, 12 or younger. We collected blood from reproductive age men and women in our communities in these homes. And the results of the flame retardants, the PBDEs, were comparable to more higher exposed population in the lower 48, which is California. So these are endocrine disrupting chemicals. And the other newer class of chemicals that we looked at was the perfluorinated compounds, which are added to items to make them stain resistant, rain gear. If you're familiar with Scotchgard, they're added to items to make them water resistant, but also Teflon pans. So the perfluorinated compounds, what was concerning to us was in Gamble at the Troutman Lake. And Gamble today is on top of the wayside, the school, the playground, the municipal homes, and some of our homes are on top of the wayside in Gamble. The military came during late 40s, early 50s, and they also went to Northeast Cape about 1950s. So we're seeing some of the health harms that were just explained by my 2 colleagues here. Because of PCBs, all that David talked about, the increase in diabetes, thyroid disease, strokes. Our strokes are getting younger. heart disease. Pretty much everybody I know is taking high blood pressure medications, and but also we're seeing changes in our children. Some of the innovative methods that we've done as far as environmental sampling. We use stickleback, which are pretty hardy fish, and you can find them pretty much everywhere. And they're indicators for reproductive health. They're small fish. We set traps at Sucre River at Northeast Cape, but also at Troutman Lake, which is right next to the community of Gamble. And as David mentioned, PCBs alter reproductive health, but also these flame retardants also alter reproductive health of men and women. There was a time that we noticed that we had more girls in Savoonga. Now we're questioning and observing boys getting feminized, and David mentioned altered playing preferences, but we're also seeing altered sexual preferences, and we're observing this, and nobody really talks about that. So it's been, nobody has done as much as we have on St. Lawrence Island, thanks to ACAT and Pam Miller, who is one of the leading experts for the Stockholm Convention. And we collaborate with national and international groups because the findings that we're finding in the Arctic, because we're a hemispheric sink, we do a lot of chemical policy reform because they're very outdated or broken, or they're not protective of communities like ours. And so we're very fortunate that Pam is one of the lead experts, and in our culture we don't brag about ourselves, but I'm always bragging about ACAT, and because we do a lot of work. We help a lot of communities, usually at last resort, and we're good at what we do, but we need help, like I mentioned earlier. We're also seeing in, other birth defects, including cleft palate, and David mentioned the undescended testicles, but also limbs where they're not attached, and other health harms never seen before in our people until the military came, or once we're more and aware and have researched on the persistent organic pollutants. So these are changes and observations that we're seeing in our communities. And it's so important that we work together. You know, we have people here from all walks of life, healthcare professionals, state and federal agencies, tribal leaders, community people. As we work toward, as a work group, we're going to have work groups here. It's so important because our children are our future generations. And as I mentioned, help is not coming for our generation. However, we honor our children and our elders in our communities. It's so important that, as I mentioned, you heard about learning and developmental disabilities that we're seeing. This is threatening not only our population, but our culture and way of life. So as we work on these work group members, it's important that we work together. We have different backgrounds, we have different levels of knowledge. However, it's so important that we work together. I can't stress that enough, because how can how can our people continue to live a lifestyle like we have for many, many generations with the utmost respect for our environment. We are connected to our lands and waters spiritually, culturally, and traditionally, a way of life that we've lived for many, many generations. And so some of the changes that David mentioned, and also my colleague here, are differences that we're seeing. We're questioning what is the source. We need more funding to find these answers. And so when we go into work groups, we're going to have questions of, what's happening in our communities? How can we improve the environment for our children, whether it's in our homes? We're bringing items into our homes. We don't know that they're toxic. I had no idea about toxic chemical exposures until I started working for ACAT. And this work is so personal. So I challenge myself to learn as much as I can. I don't have a degree, but I have a passion. And there was a time I used to be terrified to speak in front of groups, but I challenged myself. And now, you can't shut me up, whether it's on an airplane, or, in that checkout line at the store. Every opportunity to educate people at the clinic, everywhere and anywhere, because we need help. And these multinational corporations have far reach. But our power is our voice, and that's why it's important that we share and tell our stories, because it's so important that we put measures in place to protect our children's health and well-being and our future generations. Thank you.